At one point, General Electric was not just a company. It was the sound of America waking up. The light that turned on in the kitchen, the refrigerator that kept food from rotting, the turbine that fed entire cities, the engine that lifted planes into the sky. For more than a century, GE looked too essential, too deeply embedded in American life to ever collapse. Then the company that once taught America how to master electricity lost control of itself. It grew too big, too financial, too addicted to numbers on a spreadsheet. By 2008, the giant that powered the country had to be rescued. That is where this story truly begins. But before the fall, there was a city that never stopped humming. Schenectady, New York. They called it the Electric City, and it was not just a name. In the early 1900s, if you approached the General Electric Works, you could feel the factory before you saw it. A low, constant vibration in the air, a metallic thrum beneath your feet, the endless rhythm of motors, transformers, cranes, and test rooms running without pause. Other factories made shoes, cloth, or steel. General Electric made something far more dangerous: power itself. Inside those massive brick buildings, workers poured molten metal, wound copper coils, and assembled machines that would send electricity into homes, factories, and entire cities. A man could spend 30 years there. His son might walk through the same gate. GE was not just a workplace, it was the identity of a town. And that kind of power is always dangerous when people stop questioning it. General Electric was born from a fight over the future. In the late 1800s, electricity was still terrifying. It could illuminate a room, kill a man in seconds, power a city, or burn a building to the ground. Thomas Edison pushed for direct current. To him it looked safer, simpler, and easier to control. But direct current had one serious weakness: it could not travel very far. Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse fought for alternating current. It could move across longer distances and feed larger systems, but to the public it seemed violent and frightening. This was the war of currents. It was not just a technical debate. It was a war of money, publicity, lawsuits, and fear. America was choosing the nervous system of its modern age. In 1892, Edison's company merged with Thomson-Houston. The new entity became General Electric. The legend credits one man. The reality was larger. Edison provided the initial spark. Thousands of engineers, workers, and managers turned that spark into an industrial empire. Once that machine started running, it wanted to power everything. By the early 1900s, GE was no longer just selling light bulbs. It was building the backbone of modern life. Generators, transformers, motors, turbines, machines so enormous they made workers look small. Electricity moved from a laboratory wonder to something people expected in every home. Cities could grow taller. Factories no longer needed to sit beside rivers. Homes could stay lit after dark. Streetcars could move through crowded streets. Elevators could pull buildings upward. For ordinary families, this felt like progress, arriving room by room. But inside the plants, workers understood the real cost. High voltage was never clean magic. One mistake could bring a blinding flash, the smell of burning flesh, and sudden silence. That was the price of building the future first. GE sold progress to America. Inside the gates, progress came with heat, noise, danger, and death. The company learned early that power was not only something you generated, it was something you controlled. And if you could control that danger, you could control the market. That lesson would follow GE for a century. In 1900, General Electric made a decision that changed American business forever. They decided invention should no longer depend on chance. A great idea would not have to wait for a lone genius in a private workshop. GE would build a system to manufacture discovery itself. The GE Research Laboratory in Schenectady became one of America's first true industrial research labs. People called it the House of Magic. Inside, Charles Steinmetz, the Wizard of Schenectady, made electricity less mysterious and more controllable. He gave engineers the mathematics to understand systems that once seemed almost impossible to manage. Artificial lightning cracked across laboratory floors. Machines were pushed until they failed. Materials were heated, burned, broken, rebuilt, and tested again. Irving Langmuir worked on the chemistry that helped light bulbs last longer and burn more efficiently. Science went in, patents came out, products followed. Profit closed the loop again and again. To the outside world, it looked like endless miracles. Inside, GE was learning something more valuable: how to turn discovery into control. Control over light, control over machines, control over standards, control over the American home. And once GE entered people's houses, it would no longer feel like a distant corporation. It would feel personal. That personal connection would become one of the company's greatest strengths, and later, one of the things that made its fall feel so strange. By the 1920s, General Electric understood that the real battlefield was no longer just the power plant. It was the kitchen. Most families did not experience electricity through massive turbines. They felt it through small, daily changes: a room that stayed lit after sunset, a fan that moved hot air, a radio that spoke from the corner, a refrigerator that replaced the old icebox. Before electric refrigeration, keeping food cold was work. Ice had to be delivered, blocks melted, water dripped. Food spoiled quickly if the timing was wrong. GE's monitor-top refrigerator became an icon. By modern standards, it looked strange, with its compressor sitting on top like a metal crown. But to families at the time, it meant freedom from daily labor. Electric ranges, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, and radios followed. GE did not simply sell appliances, it sold a new way of living. It promised that the home could become cleaner, easier, and more modern. If a GE clock woke you, a GE bulb lit your room, a GE radio played in the parlor, and a GE stove cooked your dinner, then GE was no longer outside your life. It lived inside your walls. That was brilliant strategy. It was also the beginning of something more dangerous: the belief that the company could never be removed. Then the world went to war. During World War II, General Electric's factories changed purpose almost overnight. Machines built for comfort now served survival. GE became a central part of the arsenal of democracy. Ship propulsion, aviation systems, superchargers, electrical equipment, military components. In Lynn, Massachusetts, GE developed America's first jet engine while the fighting was still going on. Inside the plants, the workforce transformed. Women took over jobs once reserved for men. They built, inspected, wired, and assembled equipment that helped win the war. For many workers, the job suddenly felt larger than a paycheck. A shift on the line was connected to bombers, ships, convoys, and soldiers overseas. The factory became part of the battlefield, even for people who never left their hometown. The war proved something powerful to GE. It was not just useful, it was essential. America did not simply buy from General Electric, America needed it. That sense of being indispensable stayed with the company long after the war ended. And that was dangerous. Because when a company spends decades being told it is necessary, it can begin to believe that size itself is proof of strength. And that belief would stay with GE for decades. After the war, General Electric entered its golden age. America wanted comfort, houses, and proof that the sacrifices had been worth it. GE was ready to sell that proof. In Louisville, Appliance Park became a symbol of post-war prosperity. Refrigerators, ranges, washers, dryers, and dishwashers rolled out in bright colors: pink, turquoise, canary yellow, colors for a new suburban dream, bright enough to make the future feel domestic. The slogan, "Progress is our most important product," did not sound like advertising. It sounded true. GE sponsored television shows. Ronald Reagan traveled the country as its spokesman. The company became associated with stability, good jobs, American science, and the suburban dream. But beneath the success, GE was growing larger, slower, and more bureaucratic. Management layers multiplied. Decisions slowed down. Business units spread across industries. The old electrical company had become a corporate empire. And empires are difficult to steer. By the late 1970s, GE still looked powerful from the outside. Inside, it was becoming heavy. The company that once felt like the future was starting to feel old. Then Jack Welch arrived. He did not come to polish the empire. He came with a knife, and he knew exactly where to cut. In 1981, Jack Welch became CEO of General Electric. He did not come to preserve the old company. He came to cut it apart and rebuild what remained. Welch was not sentimental. He did not see GE as a family or a community. He saw it as a portfolio that needed to perform. His rule was simple and brutal. Every business had to be number one or number two in its market. If it was not, it would be fixed, sold, or closed. To investors, this looked like discipline. To workers in Schenectady and Erie, it sounded like a threat. Welch earned the nickname Neutron Jack. Like the neutron bomb, he was said to kill the people while leaving the building standing. Tens of thousands of jobs disappeared in his early years. The old promise, loyalty in exchange for security, was broken. A factory was no longer a community. It was a cost center. A worker was no longer a person with a future. He was a number on a chart. The results looked impressive on paper. GE became leaner, faster, and more profitable. Wall Street loved it because the numbers finally looked clean, sharp, and controllable. But something essential was being removed. The old GE made machines and accepted profit as a result. The new GE managed numbers and expected the company to obey. That difference mattered, even if it did not show up immediately in the stock price. Because once numbers became the center of the story, factories became less sacred. Manufacturing was no longer the heart. It was becoming an afterthought. The new heart was GE Capital. At first, financing made sense. GE could help customers buy expensive equipment. It could lease aircraft engines, fund industrial purchases, and support the businesses that GE already understood. Finance was supposed to serve the factory, not replace it as the company's soul. Over time, however, it stopped being a tool and became the engine. GE Capital expanded into loans, leasing, insurance, real estate, consumer credit, and complex financial products. The company that once controlled electricity now tried to control earnings. Financial services delivered smooth, predictable profits that factories could never match. They helped GE hit targets. They made the company look stable, even when industrial businesses were messy, cyclical, and expensive to run. Inside the old plants, the machines still ran. Workers still clocked in. Engineers still designed turbines, engines, and medical systems. But at headquarters, the center of gravity had shifted. More decisions were made by spreadsheets than by engineers. More value seemed to come from moving money than from building things. Finance has one dangerous skill. It can hide risk until the risk becomes impossible to ignore. By the mid-2000s, GE looked unstoppable from the outside. Jet engines, medical equipment, power systems, media assets, and financial services created the appearance of strength. In reality, the industrial giant was leaning heavily on financial engineering. And then, 2008 arrived. When the housing market collapsed and credit markets froze, GE Capital was suddenly exposed. General Electric still had real factories and real products, real engineers, real machines, real technology. But the financial side had grown so large that it threatened to drag everything down. A company famous for reliability had to beg for confidence from outside. Warren Buffett invested billions. The government stepped in to stabilize the system. The humiliation was public, and it cut directly into GE's oldest image of strength. General Electric, the symbol of American industrial power, needed rescue. Not because the country had stopped needing turbines, jet engines, or medical equipment, but because GE had let finance grow too close to its core. After 2008, the shrinking began. Businesses were sold, divisions were cut, debt was reduced, pride was wounded. The appliance business, the machines that once defined the American kitchen, was sold off. The lighting division, the closest link to Edison's original spark, was abandoned. Piece by piece, GE sold parts of its own history to survive. For Wall Street, these were strategic moves. For ordinary Americans, it felt stranger than that. The company that once filled the home was now selling the home away. The final breakup came in stages. In January 2023, GE Healthcare became its own company. Then, on April 2, 2024, GE Vernova was separated, carrying the energy businesses into a new era of turbines, power systems, and wind. What remained became GE Aerospace, still carrying the old GE ticker. Healthcare, energy, flight. Three focused businesses now carried fragments of the old legacy. In one sense, this was not death, it was survival. The world no longer rewarded giant conglomerates. Investors wanted focus. Technology had become too complex for one company to contain everything. Perhaps GE had to break apart to continue existing. But something larger ended. The idea of General Electric as one great American machine was over. GE tried to become everything. In the end, everything became too much. The old Titan is gone. What remains are pieces. The lights still turn on, the planes still fly, and somewhere inside that sound, there is still an echo of what General Electric once was, and what it chose to become.